I'm Theresa Phillips, creator of Legends of Appalachia, and this is more about the legend of Frankie Silver. The premise for this series is to present in docudrama format some of our legends as we here in the Appalachian Mountains know them, then to present some of the facts that we've gathered pertaining to that particular legend, and finally to go to some of the actual locations where certain events took place. For many years, I've heard the story of Frankie Silver. It usually went something like this. Frankie was a young, jealous wife who devised a plan to kill her husband. And one night, she gingerly lifts their baby daughter out of her husband Charlie's arms as he was sleeping in front of the fireplace. And then she proceeds to try to chop off his head with their axe. After struggling for a while, he finally dies. And over the course of the night, she disposes of his body by dismembering him and burning him in the fireplace. I've always had some problems with that theory. So a few years ago I began to do some research of my own, and along the way I came across several Silver family members doing their own research, and they've been most gracious in sharing their findings with me. I've always tried to be mindful of the fact that Frankie and Charlie were very young, 18 and 19 years of age. And had this tragic accident not occurred, they probably would have remained together, had several more children, and we wouldn't have this legend. Please come with us now as we explore a little more about the Frankie Silver legend. I'm standing here in the community of Kona, located in Mitchell County, North Carolina, near the Yancey County line. And this is the community where our tragic story begins. Obviously, one of the main problems with a legend as old as this one is there's no one alive today that knows the complete truth. Also, as is typical with legends, there's a lot of hearsay, where the details may change just a little bit with each telling, giving us several versions of each event. For example, in our version, we show Nancy Wilson as Charlie Silver's girlfriend, and we show the conjure man in Charlie and Frankie's cabin, and also we show Frankie's family assisting her in the disposal of Charlie's body. In truth, we have no real proof of any of this. But based upon several versions, we're presenting a possibility of how this story may have happened. This little Baptist church serves as the headquarters for the Silver family reunions and tours through the Charlie and Frankie Silver memorabilia on display downstairs. Wayne Silver, a great-great-nephew of Charlie, is one of the local family historians. The tour begins with school children or others browsing through dozens of newspaper clippings, articles, books, photographs, and then the group congregates upstairs for an interesting program and question and answer session. I should be amazed because I've always been fascinated by this story, but it sometimes amazes me how much interest people still have in this legend today. And apparently you've always been fascinated by this legend, to be conducting these tours and holding these little programs and things that you do for people. How long have you been interested in this?
I wanted somebody else out there to answer all these questions that I couldn't answer.
So it was your curiosity of these questions?
My curiosity and the response to that.
Wayne, I know that the lovely old log cabin is the original home that was built around 1800 by Jacob and possibly his father, George Jr. I know some thought is that he had a hand in that as well. And up to this point, that house has been in the Silver family. Is it still in the Silver family?
Yeah, it's still, yes, but it's for sale.
We're pleased to report that the Jacob Silver cabin has been sold to other family members, keeping it in the Silver family. And I love looking out from this little church area across the community because it really puts in perspective where the relation of each of these houses were. So the Jacob Silver house that Charlie grew up in, the large log cabin, where in relation to that was Charlie and Frankie's cabin?
Oh, just across the hill. Just across the hill.
From the cemetery, just back?
5-minute walk. just from the cemetery over into the next little valley. A very short distance.
And what about Frankie's parents? They lived relatively close too.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into the mileage, but it obviously was a short distance so that you could cross the river and go down on the other side, which would have brought you to Dayton Bend.
Okay.
So it was not a long walk. I don't even guess the mileage, and I'm not going to. But we do know that it could have been a short distance to walk.
In the cemetery, we went up there and looked at Charlie's grave a while ago. There are 3 little markers, side-by-side markers. What is the significance of that? What is the story that goes along with that?
I hope our family was right in telling us that there were actually 3 graves, and I'm assuming they were. The first grave would have been made to bury the ashes in the fireplace. That was the first evidence that there had been a crime committed. And then, of course, I think it was family tradition, probably religious and probably everything combined, that you don't dig up a grave. And if other body parts were found later and they were buried in their own grave. They've never been marked all these years, and that's nice news because they will be this year. And that's why we hope you're right, that there are actually 3. Because people are curious and they want to know. I have a question too. How come the family didn't have it marked many years ago?
So this is it.
That's it.
Why don't we find a chimney?
That was one of the questions I asked first, and certainly a good question too. I think when they found out what had really happened, they wanted to, and according to my grandfather, they just burned everything. They got rid of the whole deal. But I did find out later that parts of the chimney are the nice rocks from the chimney. Even though it might have fallen from age, I'm not sure about that. But they were carried down and used in another fireplace.
The chimney that we passed coming up here.
Right. When other people built a house, they used what was available, and the rocks were, of course, good. Nice rock to do.
Makes sense.
Everything about the Frankie Silver story is fascinating, but some of the most interesting and thought-provoking aspects are the legalities involved in the case. In researching all the related materials, we find time and time again speculation that had Frankie been allowed to tell her story to the jury, she most probably would have received a very different verdict. Unfortunately, at that time, the law didn't permit a person charged with a crime to testify in court on his or her own behalf. In 1857, all that changed with a new law, which stated that the accused could testify, but could not be compelled to testify against his or her own will. One question that always comes up is why would Frankie's lawyers allow her to deny the deed when there was so much evidence against her? It may be reasonable to assume that Frankie's father was a major factor in her defense being based on denial. But his loyalty to his daughter never wavered. He continued to work non-stop, right up to her hanging, trying to get her freed. But what does this type of defense say about Frankie's legal staff? Frankie and her father were poor and uneducated in the ways of the law. Frankie's lawyers didn't have that excuse. It's quite clear that Thomas Worth Wilson was Frankie's lawyer, and connected with the case, although perhaps not licensed to practice law quite that early, was Nicholas Washington Woodfin. We showed Mr. Woodfin assisting the ladies with their petition. 7 years later, the young lady Eliza Grace McDowell married Nicholas Woodfin. Apparently, the legal approach used in Frankie's case was in question even at that time. In an article published in the Morganton News Herald on April 3, 1924, the late Senator Sam Irving Jr. wrote about the late Colonel B.S. Gaither, who was a youthful clerk of the Superior Court at the time of Frankie's trial and execution. According to Senator Irving, Colonel Gaither always entertained the opinion that if the defense had admitted to the killing, the jury would have found her act justified and would have acquitted her. The defense, however, was a denial that the hand of Frankie Silver struck the fatal blow, and there being evidence of her guilt. the jury, following the instinct of the sleuth, which lurks in every human being, promptly convicted her of willful murder. Whatever the reason for her defense, it wasn't until Governor Stokes had refused to pardon Frankie that she finally confessed to the crime in at least 2 separate incidences. She told how Charlie had abused her and tried to kill her. And once the community learned of Frankie's confessions, numerous petitions were gathered and sent to the governor pleading for a pardon. The jailer, who had been rumored to have assisted in Frankie's escape from jail, signed 2 petitions. Even 7 of the 12 jurors signed a petition. With the whole community in support of the governor granting Frankie a pardon, it's interesting to wonder why he didn't. Actually, there were 2 governors involved in the case. The first governor was Montford Stokes, born in 1762. He was a soldier in the Revolutionary War and a U.S. Senator. He became governor of North Carolina in 1832. A letter to Governor Stokes from one of Frankie's lawyers, Thomas Worth Wilson, states, "The governor has often been reproached for giving out too many pardons. But," Wilson continues, "you have nothing to fear in this reproach. Humanity is certainly one of the greatest attributes." Even Governor Stokes' own son, Hugh Montgomery Stokes, who was a young lawyer working at the court in Morganton and was among the most fervent petitioners, stated in a letter to his father that he knew of only one other white woman who had been hanged since North Carolina became a state. He also said that, except for Charlie Silver's own family, everyone in the whole community favored a pardon. But Governor Stokes did not pardon Frankie. He resigned in late 1832 to become the Commissioner of Indian Affairs and moved to Fort Gibson in what is now Oklahoma, where he died. The appeals for a pardon for Frankie Silver then fell into the hands of the next governor, David Lowry Swain. He was born in 1801. David Swain was serving as a Superior Court judge and would have presided at the Frankie Silver trial had the Grand Assembly not elected him to the higher office of Governor of North Carolina. In the midst of a high-profile case with petitions and support of a pardon coming from all factions, still no hint of a pardon. 2 other North Carolina women were convicted of murder and sentenced to be hanged in 1832. Governor Stokes did pardon Sally Barney Castle of Mecklenburg County, and Governor Swain did pardon Catherine Bastia of Cabarrus County. Mrs. Joe Ball's 8th grade class at Heritage Middle School in Valdez, North Carolina, has for several years sent petition to the current North Carolina governor for a pardon of forgiveness to Francis Stewart Silver. But following true to form with the past governors involved in the Frankie Silver case, still no pardon.
The Burke County Historical Society is located in the old courthouse that was built around the time Frankie was hanged. Inside, we see an artist's rendition of what the older courthouse may have looked like. This courthouse is where Frankie's trial took place. This area was once known as Damon's Hill. There's some thought that Frankie's hanging took place here. Others believe that the gallows were closer to the courthouse.
According to legend, other family members met with violent deaths of one kind or another. Frankie's mother reportedly died of a poisonous snake bite not long after the trial. She was alive and well 17 years later in 1850 census. Frankie's father was supposed to have lost his life while cutting a tree, with a tree limb crushing his head. All we know for sure is that Isaiah Stewart died in 1836